We are rounding out our Scream franchise review series with a review of Scream 6 from 2023. Let's talk about it. What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Welcome back into JC's Movies, where you can see all kind of movie and TV show talk with me, JC, especially within the superhero, comedy, and horror genres, as we'll be continuing to talk today in the lead up to Scream 7 as we get set to dive in for a review of Scream 6 here momentarily. Before I do, just want to hit you with a quick reminder. If you're a fan of horror movies like Scream, you want some more Scream content, we'll be having plenty of it coming your way here as Scream 7's release is upon us this week. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Doesn't cost you anything. Get these videos directly into your feed. Check out the other Scream reviews that we put out thus far as we went through the entire franchise here in the lead up to Scream 7. That really helps me out as I continue to grow the channel. Plus, you can help out just by hitting that thumbs up button. Giving this video a like helps it hit that YouTube algorithm so it'll find other movie fans like you and me. With that out of the way, we're going to get set to dive into Scream 6 momentarily. Obviously, spoilers are bound as we get into the plot here, but before I do, just a little bit of a brief background on this movie, as this one's a little bit different. Scream 5, you did bring in, radio silence to direct. You brought in Guy Busick and James Vanderbilt to write. You return kind of that core group here for Scream 6, and it is, yet again, another Scream movie without Wes Craven. But this one, to me, just feels more different than I guess any other Scream movie, except maybe, Scream 3, as they take it out of the Woodsboro setting. They move it into a city setting here as we go to New York City. And I think what's most different about it is it's our first Scream movie with no Neve Campbell, no Sidney Prescott here present, as they kind of gypped her, tried to, offer her the short end of the stick, so to speak, with what they were trying to pay her for this movie, which she wasn't going to stand for, and I respect her for that. But because of that, no Neve Campbell here. We do get Sidney Prescott references throughout the film, but that in and of itself takes away from this one a little bit. And upon my first watch of this movie in theaters, there were moments that I really liked, but ultimately I was left disappointed. It was probably my most disappointing Scream theater experience, to be quite honest with you. I will say, though, upon my rewatch here for this review, I did enjoy it a little bit more than I expected to, but there are several things that still bump me about the movie, particularly when we come to the end. I think the very end of this movie really still hits me the wrong way and drops my score a little bit, which I'll give my rating at the end of this review. And then still yet, I absolutely cannot stand all the core 4 shit that comes throughout this movie. People want to hate on Halloween Kills for, the evil dies tonight quote, but that never ever really bumped me. I know I may be in the minority there, but the evil dies tonight never bothered me as much as they say core 4 here in this film 26 times, which is the corniest thing I've ever heard. And they thought that it was so cool and they wanted to repeat it a million times in this movie. And that absolutely bumps me on this one. Just a little bit of a preview of one of the things I'm going to knock on as we get into the plot here. But other than that, just getting some of the negativity out of the way, got to get that off my chest here early. I do think I enjoyed this one more than I expected to on my rewatch, and there are quite a few things that stuck out to me as we go through the plot here that I didn't remember, from my first time watching this, that I did enjoy here upon this rewatch. So it's definitely not all negative, and I don't think this is as bad of a movie as I initially did upon my first watch, but definitely still some elements to me that really don't feel like Scream, I guess you can say, and just don't hit me the right way. So, Scream 6, not my favorite by any means, but I do think it's an enjoyable time, as we'll talk about here as we get set to dive into the plot here of Scream 6. As I said earlier, spoilers abound. So if you haven't seen this one, watch it before you watch this review, because we're about to spoil the shit out of it for you as we dive into the plot here for Scream 6. And of course, we got to lead off with talking about the opening here, as is customary in a Scream movie. And one thing that I do like here is you hear the phone ringing as kind of, the opening credits fall. You get the different production companies and you get to hear the phone ringing, and you're expecting to have just kind of that initial phone call from Ghostface. Instead, the phone ringing that we hear is revealed to be, taking place at a restaurant. So it's definitely not, the opening call there that we're accustomed to. One of a couple of good fake outs that they do provide us with here in this movie. And from there, we then focus on Samara Weaving, which I was glad to see in this movie. Wish she would have been in it more, other than, being kind of the opening scene here as she's sitting at a bar. And, it was weird to hear her with an accent as well, as I'm so used to hearing her with an American accent in all of her appearances. But we find out that she is a professor at a college and that she teaches classes on slashers. And she is texting on the phone with someone named Reggie, who she is waiting on to, arrive for her date here at this bar. He calls her then because it seems like he kind of can't find the location. That's what we're led to believe. And he asks her, what color is the outside of the restaurant? And she says it's red. He responds, I don't see anything red. But he tells her, there's an alley nearby that he thinks he can cut down that would lead to the restaurant potentially, and asks her if there is indeed an alley nearby that restaurant, to which she says yes. And essentially he asks her to, come meet her in that alley. She begins to make her way there, but he begins to make her think that he's being chased by someone, even says that they have a knife. And, then Ghostface on the phone, which of course we kind of have realized at this point that it's not Reggie, it's Ghostface on the phone. And he says, that's not the craziest part, that someone's chasing me with a knife. The craziest part is that you teach a class on slashers and would still come into a dark alley, as he then takes her out with a brutal, gory kill and says, now I see something red, as, he slashes her and we get the, blood onto the Ghostface mask. And that is one thing that this movie has going for it. I think if you're a fan of Carnage Candy, this is probably the most gory and most bloody Scream movie to date. Depends on how you feel about that. Depends on how you probably feel about this movie. But from there, we get an immediate shock, and I do like this turn here in the movie, which I think makes it actually a pretty good opening for the Scream franchise, because all of a sudden, after Ghostface takes out the Samara Weaving character, Ghostface instantly removes his mask, and we're led to believe, holy shit, we know who Ghostface is right here at the beginning, although, that's not exactly the case, but it is revealed to be Tony Revolori's character in this movie, Jason Carvey, as he then switches to street clothes, makes his way, back towards his apartment. On his way there, he kind of crosses paths with Tara, Jenna Ortega's character, returning from Scream 5, as she's making her way to a frat party, essentially, and we find out that they are, friends, or at least, classmates. They go to the same college together. But when Jason arrives back in his apartment, he thinks his friend Greg is calling him, as we see that's who it is on the caller ID. And, upon answering the phone, Jason immediately starts apologizing, saying, he had to, go out and test it and get a kill under his belt. And Greg is using the Ghostface voice on the phone. Jason responds, hey, we promised we wouldn't use the voice on each other. Greg, though, goes on to ask him how the kill felt, and he begins to explain, what it felt like taking out, the Samara Weaving character, the film professor, and he kind of states his reasoning, saying she shouldn't have given me a C on my Giallo paper, as he's a fan of Italian horror, and we kind of get that little meta reference thrown in here in the opening. Also, back in their apartment, it stuck out to me upon my first viewing and still sticks out to me here on my rewatch. Get a Last Podcast on the Left poster in the apartment. A nice little Easter egg there if you're a fan of that true crime podcast, which is my personal favorite true crime podcast. But Greg asked Jason on the phone, why they are doing this. And he says, of course, because, we're finishing Richie's film. And Greg says, yes, we're going to kill Tara and Sam. Jason asks Greg, where are you? And Greg says, I already told you, I'm here in the apartment, which then leads to a game of hot and cold as Jason tries to find Greg within the apartment. You get a nice little lead up to this scene, a nice little build up, so to speak, as he eventually approaches the fridge. And when he approaches the fridge and puts his hand on the door, you hear Ghostface on the phone, you're on fire, as Jason opens the fridge and finds Greg's mutilated body parts before he is then taken out by Ghostface in another gory kill. Like I said, a lot of Carnage Candy here in this movie. But from there, we get the title drop and the needle drop simultaneously in classic Scream fashion. You got to love that, as we then have our true opening, in my opinion, there with the kill of who we thought was revealed as Ghostface earlier on. So almost, a fake out opening and then a real opening. From there, we get into our plot here, which begins with our reintroduction to Sam, the Melissa Barrera character, as she's talking to a therapist in our first scene with her, seeing her again. And she basically gives kind of that therapist an exposition dump on her backstory. And we also learn that she's basically been rumored to be the killer since the ending of Scream 5. And everyone has kind of said that she actually orchestrated everything, and they believe that she framed Richie and Amber, which of course that plot point comes back to play here towards the end of the movie, and we'll get into that when we get there. But she tells her therapist that she has decided to, go to therapy because it actually felt right to her to stab Richie 22 times and then shoot him in the head, which is crazy. A little bit of Billy Loomis coming through there in her character. And that causes her therapist to then abruptly end that therapy session and threaten to report her, to the police because of what she just told him in regards to that. But Sam then returns back to her apartment, and when she comes home, that's when we are introduced to Quinn, the new roommate of Sam and Tara there in the apartment, who is in bed with a guy. Sam asks her, where Tara is, and then Quinn pleads with her because Tara has gone to a frat party and she feels like Sam is going to be mad. And of course, as soon as she tells her, Sam is immediately upset and begins to, question Quinn about, did Tara take her taser with her or some type of protection? As, we obviously realize that Sam is very protective of Tara, as she would be after the events of the previous movie. But we kind of cut to that frat party from there, where we are reintroduced to Mindy Meeks Martin, who of course now has short hair in this movie, and she's with a new character, her love interest in this movie, Annika, at the aforementioned frat party. Chad is also there. We are introduced to him, or reintroduced to him, I guess I should say, the twin brother of Mindy, and he has a new friend as well, his roommate in this movie, which is the character of Ethan. And then we cut to Tara, who is kind of being hit on by this frat bro, so to speak. And, she kind of begins to head upstairs with him. Annika comes over, tries to stop them. Tara says, no, I'm good. I'm going to stick around for a little bit longer, as Annika tries to get them to leave. And Tara's like, no, I'm going to go upstairs, have a good time, yada, yada, yada. But that leads to Annika then finding Chad in the party and telling him, hey, you're needed. And of course, he goes immediately there and stops the two from going upstairs. And a fight is about to ensue between, Chad and this frat bro. I can't remember his name, but nonetheless, just as they're about to fight, guess who shows up? Of course, Sam pops up, and we get a great line from her as her badassery continues with the awesome quote, oh, I'm just about to, tase you in the nuts, and then tases this frat bro in the nuts. And then, of course, they all end up, leaving the party from there, which Tara is pissed about because, she just wants to be a college student and kind of live her life, almost acting as if, nothing had happened to them previously. And she kind of feels like Sam won't let her do that. But after this conversation, or kind of in the midst of this conversation, we get, another group of passerby college kids, so to speak, and one of them throws a drink on Sam and actually calls her a murderer, which kind of hammers home what Sam was explaining to the therapist about the rumor going around and people believing that, she is the actual killer, from Scream 5, and that she had set up, Richie and Amber. And that is, of course, due to her tie to Billy Loomis, which has since come out since the events of that movie. But from there, we go back to the apartment as the group returns there, and we get a scene between, Quinn and Tara. And Quinn kind of tells Tara that she knows what it's like to have someone up her ass, as, Sam is up hers, because that's how she feels like her father is with her. And that is due to the fact that she had a brother that she had lost previously. We kind of learn here that it was in a car accident, so to speak. More on that later on. But she says that led to her dad even transferring to become a member of the NYPD, as we know that they are now in college in New York. So he wanted to be closer to her. So we know that her dad's around as a police officer as well. And from there, Chad enters into the room. Quinn exits, and we get kind of our first moment between Chad and Tara, who were kind of set up as a, will they, won't they type of couple throughout this movie, I guess you could say, especially here, right on. Chad tells her that she could do better than, that frat bro. And then the two are kind of about to kiss. And of course, Quinn pops in and interrupts it before they get a chance to kiss. And, kind of that way we continue that will they or won't they throughout Scream 6 here. But in the entry of the apartment building back downstairs, the foyer, if you will, whatever you want to call it there, leading up the stairs to the apartment building is kind of where you would see, the mailboxes of an apartment building downstairs in the main entryway. Sam's sitting on the steps. A guy comes in, which is, Josh Segarra's character, which I remember, initially seeing him in Arrow, as I'm a fan of, DC and the Arrowverse. But he's actually playing a character named Danny Brackett, which I love him having the last name of Brackett, just continuing the kind of ongoing tradition of Scream referencing the Halloween franchise and being kind of referential to it. But the two begin to make out, and we kind of learn that they have a secret relationship going on currently. From there, we hear Chad burst out of the apartment upstairs and he yells down the stairs to Sam, telling her, she needs to come upstairs immediately. And when she does arrive upstairs, we see the friend group then watching a news report about the killings that we just saw in the opening involving the Jason and Greg characters. And Sam immediately wants to take Tara, get the hell out of Dodge, which how can you blame her? But Tara, of course, fights that because, she's in college. She doesn't want to necessarily abandon her college education, so to speak. So, you have that conflict between the two going on throughout this film. And, Tara says, hey, Quinn, call your dad. Let's get some more info on what's going on here and, go from there. So Quinn indeed calls her dad, which is where we get the introduction of Dermot Mulroney in this movie. He is Detective Bailey, and he tells them that they need to come to the station because he has found Sam's ID at the scene where Jason and Greg were killed. So Sam and Tara begin to make their way to the police station. We get a scene of them, walking down the New York streets. Sam's phone begins to ring. And who is it? It's Richie's number, who she hadn't deleted yet. And of course, when we're getting the call from Richie, it's Sam getting her first call from Ghostface in this movie. And then all of a sudden, Ghostface pops out, tries to attack Tara, who kind of fights him off, and then a chase scene ensues, which, that attack seemed super abrupt to me. Just something about that one kind of seemed off. I don't know if it was a reshoot or what, but I always thought that something about that first attack and that first, Ghostface call felt off in this movie. But anyways, as the chase scene ensues, they end up, running into a nearby bodega, which of course we get here with the New York City setting. Ghostface then follows them in there. We get a couple of customers inside the bodega trying to stop Ghostface, and he immediately disposes of those two. And then the store clerk breaks out a shotgun, tries to shoot Ghostface unsuccessfully. Ghostface pops out, ends up taking him out, and then stealing the shotgun, which is one of my first knocks on this movie, is then Ghostface starts wielding a shotgun. And that just feels out of character, feels weird to see Ghostface with a gun in this movie, to kind of go along with taking us out of Woodsboro, no Sidney Prescott and all the other things. It's just certain things in this movie that feel out of character to me, which is one of the reasons why I was disappointed with it upon my initial watch. And this scene still bumps me a little bit, just seeing Ghostface wield a shotgun, which I'm not personally the biggest fan of. But Tara and Sam hide, behind the aisles, and, Sam's pretty smart, throws a can to kind of distract Ghostface, and they're able to escape the bodega just as the police arrive. And Ghostface leaves a mask behind, which would become a theme throughout this movie. He also left one behind in that initial kill, we come to learn here. And that's another detail that I'm like, really? He's just leaving masks behind now and running off maskless? No, I don't know. Something else that bumps me about Scream 6. Like I said, there's several things in this movie that just kind of knock me. That's another one in my opinion. But from there, we get kind of an interrogation scene of Detective Bailey talking to, both Sam and Tara in the police station. And that's when we get the reveal of, the Ghostface mask that was left behind at the crime scene in the opening had the DNA of who? Richie from Scream 5, Jack Quaid's character. And then the mask that was found at the bodega where they were attacked had the DNA of who? Charlie and Jill from Scream 4, essentially, counting back from the most recent Scream to the furthest one in the past, as every mask we found kind of has DNA of different killers on it. I don't know, it's just a little bit too corny to me, I guess, in my opinion. I don't know, I just was never a big fan of that decision here in this movie, but that's just my opinion on it. But in that scene, as Detective Bailey kind of interrogates Sam and Tara, he's pulled out of the room by another officer, as the officer tells him, hey, FBI is here, and they're claiming jurisdiction. And, so he leaves to go meet the FBI agent, and the FBI agent is none other than Kirby from Scream 4, Hayden Panettiere, with her return here to the franchise, which I really love getting Kirby back. She was a fan favorite in Scream 4 of many, including myself. Having her become an FBI agent, I think is kind of fitting, because it seems like, she might try and follow in Dewey's footsteps and become a cop. And then she kind of took that to the next level and becoming an FBI agent. But after the introduction, between those characters, which we find out Sam and Kirby kind of knew each other. They were just, in the same high school in Woodsboro, but a few years apart, I think is the detail that Kirby gives there. But Sam and Tara kind of inform Detective Bailey and Kirby that they intend to leave town, but, both the detective and FBI agent Kirby now inform them that they can't, because they are very much persons of interest now, because Sam's ID was found, at the initial murder scene, and, all the other things that tie them to these murders that have happened thus far, kind of similar to what happened to Sydney in Scream 4, how she couldn't leave town. So we know that Tara and Sam are very much stuck here in New York City until this thing plays itself out and they find whoever the Ghostface killer is. And of course, as they exit the police station, what's waiting outside but a huge group of reporters? And this is where we get our reintroduction to Gale Weathers, and at least we get Courtney Cox back in this movie, giving us, some feel that we're back into, the Scream franchise, with, her being involved. And she begins to kind of question Tara and Sam as she asks them if they feel like Ghostface is there because he followed them to the Big Apple, thus kind of placing blame on them, which leads to Sam swinging a punch, a call back to that OG Scream when Sydney knocked out Gale, but this time Gale's ready. She ducks, even has a quote about, being ready for it, but what she's not ready for is there to be a second punch thrown coming from Tara, who does connect on her punch. And of course, they are both mad because she wrote a book following the events in Scream 5, which at the end of Scream 5, we hear her talk about, I'm not going to write anything about these killings. These guys can die anonymously. I want to write a book about a really good man. So we were kind of led to believe she was going to write a book about Dewey. Instead, she did indeed write a book about the killings and is trying to option it even into, another movie potentially. And I just don't like that character turn for Gale either here in Scream 6. We'd come so far with her, and in Scream 5 left her in a really good place, and it looked like she was going to write a book about Dewey. Instead, they kind of revert her character here back in Scream 6 to kind of almost reminiscent of, Gale in Scream 1 or something, which I wasn't the biggest fan of either. So that kind of bumps me here in this moment when we learn that fact as well. But from there, the next death scene that we get is Sam's therapist, who is killed before Red Right Hand kicks in. And as Red Right Hand kicks in, we kind of pan over the college, and that feels like classic Scream, almost reminiscent of Scream 2, back at the college setting, Red Right Hand kicking in. I do enjoy that. But unfortunately, from, a scene that I did enjoy there, or a moment that I did enjoy, we then get our obligatory rules scene here in Scream 6, with Mindy kind of, spouting out a bunch of rules, spouting out about the subject list. But to me, this scene feels so forced, probably the most forced rule scene that we've ever gotten in the Scream franchise, in my opinion, and just something about it feels so off. And even now on the rewatch, I don't think it played through that well. And I hate that because I usually love the rule scene and love going over the suspect list and all of that, but it just kind of felt like, hey, we have to have this in here. Let's get it all in here in one scene and have Mindy just spout on with a long monologue and just get this into the movie. And it didn't work. But of course, from there, we then find out from Detective Bailey, as he tells Kirby, that the mask found at the killing of that therapist has the DNA of Roman Bridger. Continuing our theme, counting down, we had the DNA from 5, the DNA from 4, now the DNA from 3, as we continue to kind of count backwards in the movie's history here with the masks that Ghostface is deciding to leave at the scene, which I don't know if it's any more or less corny than, him leaving pictures in Scream 3, but still, like I said earlier, not a fan of that touch either. And speaking of things that I'm not a fan of, boy, do we come to probably one of my biggest deterrences here in this movie, as in the next scene, we get Chad and Mindy, who are going to stay with Sam, Tara, and Quinn at their place because, they feel like there's strength in numbers or safety in numbers, whatever it is, which then leads to Chad coining the term Core 4. I could not roll my eyes harder at the corniness of that term. And then especially the fact that they say it 10 times in the next 2 scenes and then say it a million times throughout the entire movie. And just the term itself is corny enough, but the fact that they try and drive it home and make it, a cool point in this movie is absolutely terrible. I'm just not a fan of that Core 4 term. Not a fan of how much they try and make us like it. It's never not going to be corny as hell to me. And those of you that feel how you feel, like I said in the opening about Evil Dies Tonight, that's how I feel about the Core 4 term, because Evil Dies Tonight never bumped me as much as this Core 4 shit did here in Scream 6. But anyway, I won't try and hate on that too much throughout here, but I guarantee it's probably not the last time I'm going to mention it, because it's definitely not the last time that the movie mentions it. But from there, we get Quinn in her bedroom talking on the phone, and Ghostface is actually standing over her, which she doesn't recognize, maybe, as she has her back to him. But Danny Brackett, Sam's boyfriend, is in the apartment across kind of the alleyway there, and his window faces her bedroom window, so he can see Ghostface standing over her, and he attempts to, call Sam to try and warn them. She doesn't answer, so he sends a picture then to, each member of the Core Four, and they get a picture of Quinn being attacked by Ghostface then, so they immediately all approach the bedroom, but Quinn's body falls out, and then Ghostface comes out slashing Mindy on the arm before moving to stab Annika in the gut multiple times. Everyone and their mother gets stabbed in the gut in this movie. We'll talk more about that as we go through here. But from there, we do get a really good chase scene that ensues, and that kind of culminates with Danny opening up his window. As we said, it's across from the window of that apartment, and he extends a ladder from his window to theirs for them to climb across to reach his apartment and get safe, as Mindy has barricaded the door so Ghostface can't get in. So they attempt to, make their way from their apartment over to Danny's, further potential safety. And Sam makes her way across. She is then followed by Mindy, who makes her way across. They both make it, but then that leaves Annika, who is not nearly as lucky, because Ghostface breaks down that barricade, gets into the bedroom, and begins to shake that ladder, eventually throwing Annika off the ladder, and she falls to her death, which is another super gory scene as we see her fall, hit a dumpster, and then we get to see the aftermath of her on the ground. Unfortunately, that next day, Ethan eventually shows up, and Chad confronts him as they kind of all sit around, the crime scene, on the back of an ambulance. And Chad essentially is suspecting Ethan because he wasn't around when all of that went down. And Mindy also, says, Ethan is on the top of her suspect list as well. And Ethan's alibi is essentially that he had econ class that night is the reason that he wasn't there. But we get then a cut to Detective Bailey, who was also on that crime scene. We know that Quinn was his daughter, so he is super distraught because of that. We get, some good acting from Dermot Mulroney as he's all teared up because of Quinn's death. And, of course, he is crying, saying that he now has no kids, because we've learned earlier that Quinn's brother had died, as she detailed to Tara kind of earlier in this film. And he has also been taken off the case because of his personal connection. But he says, he's still not going to rest until Ghostface is revealed and, of course, disposed of because of, what he's done to his daughter, to his kids. And, that's kind of a good moment there for Dermot Mulroney. But Gail shows up, of course, then as well, and tells them that she has discovered something, and she knows where these masks that Ghostface has been leaving behind are coming from. And she takes the ensemble, with the additions of Kirby and Detective Bailey, to that location that she's talking about, which is kind of an old abandoned movie theater that is full of Scream/Stab memorabilia. And that's probably my favorite touch of this movie, is when you go into that theater for the first time and you see all the different Easter eggs from every single Scream movie that we've had thus far. I mean, everything from Stu's robe that he wore in Scream 1 to the TV that smashed his head, and you go on down the line. And at this point, it truly had me thinking that Ghostface could be Stu, and that's probably my personal bias because I want Stu to be involved so much, and I'm super happy that Matthew Lillard is back in Scream 7. We'll see where that goes and can't wait to talk about that more. But this movie right here, that was one of the things that I was hoping throughout is, it's got to be Stu now. All this stuff ties back to, someone who has all this memorabilia. It's got to be the Cult of Stu type deal is what I was hoping. So at this point, they kind of had me bought in that was a possibility, especially since, that TV, which fell on his head, was even there in that theater. But Gail claims that the killer must have found that place and started taking the masks off of the mannequins there, which they have all 9 Ghostface masks there. Everyone, from Billy and Stu up to, Richie and Amber from the last movie. And then we see Sam kind of approaching one of those mannequins, where we get our first hallucination in this movie, the first of a couple of her hallucinating Billy Loomis again. We get Skeet Ulrich back one more time here in Scream 6, which I was happy to see. And then, he's kind of advising her as he did, in the previous movie, which I did like those scenes in this one, much like I did in Scream 5. But even more so, something I liked even more than that was the interaction in that theater between Mindy and Kirby, who were kind of similar characters, both film junkies. But, talking about Stu potentially being a suspect in this movie, I even bought into that fact even more, because Kirby drops a line talking about the TV that killed Stu Macher as the camera kind of zooms in on it. And then Mindy responds with, "If you believe that he's dead," which in my mind at the time, upon first watching this movie, I was like, oh, they're dropping hints. Stu's going to be involved. But, now in hindsight, I think it was more so just the writers playing into, people like me that want to see Stu come back so much. And they were kind of giving us a little bit of a red herring aspect, with that quote. But I do love the Kirby and Mindy going back and forth from there with, horror movie talking about different horror movies. And we get, kind of a horror movie meta references there in that scene, as they are both, very similar characters I referenced earlier, as they're both kind of film junkies. But we also learn in that scene with an exchange between Gail and Sam that Sam and Tara's mother's out of their life and they kind of only have each other, which leads to a surprisingly emotional moment. Nice little music swell, and you get a good quote from Gail there talking about you can have a family with only one person. Obviously, a little bit of a reference to Dewey, and just in case you don't get it, that Dewey theme, that Broken Arrow theme kicks in right there in that moment as well, which really is a nice touch in my opinion. But from there, we cut to a scene that is reminiscent of Scream 2. I think we get a little bit of a Scream 2 Easter egg here as Kirby, Mindy, Ethan, and Chad are in a van as Kirby attempts to trace Ghostface's call, kind of using Sam and Tara as bait, essentially. And you kind of get a nod to Randy's death here, including the camera panning to different people on the phone. And even Mindy kind of calls it out, as you would expect her to do with her, movie knowledge. She kind of calls out, hey, this, broad daylight, we're in a van. That's exactly how, our Uncle Randy was killed, which is a nice little callback and a nice touch there. A nice nod to the Randy Meeks character. But it ultimately ends with Kirby actually being able to trace the call, and they realize the call is coming from Gail's apartment. Funny enough, which leads to Sam and Tara stealing Detective Bailey's cop car to head there. Back at Gail's place, Ghostface calls her, and Gail's new boyfriend answers the phone. Really? She's moved on already? She's already got a new boyfriend? Didn't like that touch either. But he hands her the phone, claiming the call is coming from the killer. A little bit too meta there, in my opinion. But nonetheless, Ghostface takes out Gail's boyfriend as she's on the phone. And you kind of see this happen in the background, thus confirming to us there's at least two Ghostfaces in this movie yet again. And Ghostface hits a nice quote here saying, you couldn't stop what happened to Dewey, just like you won't be able to stop this, as he throws her boyfriend through, a glass-plated window. He lands in the living room, and a chase scene ensues again. This time, this one ends with Gail getting away, and she starts firing shots into closed doors of the apartment as Ghostface calls again and tells her, you cracking under the pressure and turning into Ghostface would have been a great twist, which I think is a nice call out to the theory that a lot of people have had that, Gail, Dewey, or Sydney should eventually become the killer. But Gail ends up doing something pretty clever that we don't see a ton in these movies, and that's she hangs up the phone and uses kind of the redial feature so that we hear the phone ringing in a nearby, behind a nearby closed door, which she then begins to fire shots into. And we hear Ghostface wince, so we know that she at least hit him once, but then he merges out, attacks Gail, stabbing her, guess where? In the stomach, just like everybody else gets stabbed in this movie. Not once, but twice she gets stabbed, and then Ghostface is on top of her. Looks like he's about to finish her off, and it could be the end of Gail. But Sam and Tara burst in, and Sam begins shooting, which causes Ghostface to flee, just as we hear sirens and the paramedics burst in the room, which reveals that Gail is, kind of probably going to be safe and survive those potential stab wounds. And then from there, we get another great Core 4 line. Oh my God, I love it so much. As they wait in the hospital waiting room, Chad drops another Core 4 line, rolling my eyes into the back of my head yet again. But Tara comes up with a good idea of attempting to trap the killer, and so they call Detective Bailey to try and set that up, and he suggests that they do it in that theater room, that Scream stab memorabilia room that we talked about earlier, because they can use the security cameras and such against Ghostface. So the group intends to head there, which leads to them getting on the subway to go to that location. And on the subway, we get a really cool scene here, which I am a fan of. They end up getting separated on the subway cars, unfortunately, so you end up with Tara, Sam, and Chad together. Mindy is back with Ethan, but despite the fact that they're on the same subway car, she doesn't want to be near him because she's like, get your Ghostface ass away from me, Ghostface, because he's still at the top of her suspect list. But what's really cool about this subway scene is that it's happening during Halloween, so we get a bunch of horror references here with people in a ton of different costumes. I mean, we see Freddy Krueger, we see Pinhead, we see Michael Myers. You go on down the list, so many costumed Easter eggs of famous horror movies, which I do like here on this one, kind of making horror movie nods without having to do it via dialogue and doing it for us visually, which I personally like in this one. And of course, that also leads to multiple Ghostface fake outs because we get multiple people wearing the costume and kind of the characters expecting that it's the real Ghostface, only ultimately for him to exit the subway car. But then, the power starts to go out as it does there in points in the subway, and Ghostface attacks Mindy, covering her mouth so no one else in the subway can hear her. And guess where she gets stabbed? In the gut multiple times. And then once the power comes back on, Ethan kind of sees her back against the back of that subway car. He runs over to her, saves her, pulls her off of the subway, and signals some nearby emergency personnel to come by and potentially help her so that maybe she can survive being stabbed in the stomach just like everyone else in this movie. But from there we get Kirby meeting up with Chad, Tara, and Sam at that theater location, which we found earlier. As they enter, Kirby claims that there's only one gun and she's going to have it, being the FBI agent. And, the movie is very much attempting to set her up as a red herring. From there, we get Sam approaching the mannequins again, and she hallucinates Billy one more time. And he convinces her that, if someone says you're safe here, you're definitely not safe. So he tells her to, get a weapon, clear the place yourself, which of course she goes for one of the knives on the mannequin. And we get a good quote there from Billy Loomis as Skeet Ulrich says, "Good choice, my favorite," which I like. But then we continue to kind of hammer home Kirby as a potential red herring. And the movie even had me convinced at this point because Detective Bailey calls Sam as they're at the theater and tells her to get out of there because he heard back from the FBI field office and Kirby had actually been fired as an agent because they deemed her, no longer mentally stable after the event in Scream 5. She kind of went off the rails, lost her job as an FBI agent, according to Detective Bailey. And, the movie, like I said, even had me convinced that Kirby may be involved and be one of the Ghostface here at this point. But from there, we kind of cut to Tara and Chad alone again in a different room of that theater building. And finally, the will they or won't they kind of resolved as they get to have that kiss that's been teased, throughout this entire movie. And of course, as soon as they do, Ghostface pops out and attacks them. Chad fights him off, and then they join Sam in another room, and she claims, Kirby's the killer. She's made this whole theater her kill box. Chad then convinces Sam and Tara to run, as he kind of tries to fight off Ghostface himself. But as he does, a second Ghostface pops out, and this is one of the moments that still bumps me about this movie. Even upon a rewatch here, I'm like, there's absolutely no way. Because not only is Chad stabbed yet again, just like he was in Scream 5, but he's stabbed by both Ghostfaces on each side of him, and we're talking double-digit stabs for, Chad in this movie right here in Scream 6, and spoiler alert, he survives. I just don't. So many people get stabbed in the stomach and survive in this movie, and that just absolutely bumps me about this one. Maybe it's a commentary by, the directors and writers were trying to make about the franchise, but it did not work. It just made this movie seem very far-fetched, in my opinion. You couldn't even put on your suspenders of disbelief long enough to believe this one. And so that's another thing that bumps me about this movie, but I digress on that. Let's continue on here as we're now into the third act of this movie, as Kirby then shows up, firing shots at Ghostface before Sam and Tara pop out claiming, she's the killer. Stay back. They don't trust her, obviously. And then, of course, we get Detective Bailey showing up as he was coming there to essentially help them, or so we thought. But he shoots Kirby. And, after Kirby had claimed whatever he says isn't true, he shoots her. And we get our reveal, which is two Ghostface, not one, but two Ghostface pop out behind Detective Bailey as he kind of begins to laugh. And this is where we get Dermot Mulroney going completely over the top, chewing up the scenery for the rest of this movie, as we have a reveal that we have not one, not two, but three Ghostface for the first time ever in the franchise here in Scream 6. And one of the Ghostface is revealed to be Ethan, which good call by Mindy. At least we get her smarts coming through in this one. He was the top of her suspect list, so she was right here in this movie. And then the second Ghostface reveal is a little bit more surprising. I remember being in the theater, we had Dermot Mulroney's character of Detective Bailey, we had Ethan, and the other Ghostface hadn't been unmasked yet. And I'm like, oh, be Stu Macher. But it wasn't. Nonetheless, it was Quinn, who we thought had died earlier, which leads to Detective Bailey revealing, he had swapped the bodies for the fake out so that, it would be revealed that Quinn was essentially Ghostface. So our three Ghostface are revealed, and their motive is also revealed. And it's simply revenge, as we find out that the brother of Quinn that had died, that you referenced earlier and talked about being killed in a car accident, was not killed in a car accident at all. Their brother is Richie from Scream 5. So, we have kind of the family wanting to get revenge on Sam here as the motive in Scream 6, which also leads to the reveal of Quinn being the one that started the rumor about Sam actually being the killer, which is going to go, to help frame her here in this movie as part of their plan as well. But just as they're kind of revealing all this, Kirby pops back up, gets some shots off, which kind of causes everyone to start to disperse. Sam still has that knife. She immediately attacks Ethan, stabbing him multiple times, pretty brutally. And then a chase scene ensues, which ends with Tara and Sam kind of going up to the top level of this theater, and Tara hanging off the ledge, Sam holding her by her arm as Ethan, who is now up, waits below. And, Tara says, "You got to let me go," kind of hammering home what we talked about earlier with their relationship, a little bit of a thematic element here. And Sam says, "Okay, I will," hands Tara a knife, lets her go so she falls onto Ethan. And then eventually, as they fall, Tara kills Ethan right there in that moment. So he's disposed of, which leaves Quinn upstairs trying to attack Sam. Sam shoots Quinn directly in the head, which Detective Bailey sees as he has come upstairs then at that point as well. And then we get, one of the dumber moments in this movie, because Detective Bailey is holding a gun, but instead of, attempting to shoot Sam, he just charges at her. So the two collide and then end up, going over the railing, and, a brief kind of flash, and we cut to Detective Bailey waking up down on that lower level, and he's getting a call from Ghostface, which of course is revealed to be Sam calling him. She pops out wearing the full Ghostface regalia, mask, robe, and all, finally, taking on the Billy Loomis legacy, so to speak, but just to take out Detective Bailey with an absolutely brutal kill, probably stabbing him more than she even stabbed Richie at the end of Scream 5. Something that I'm sure Billy Loomis would be proud of, as she ends it with stabbing Detective Bailey through the eye, and Red Right Hand begins to play for the second time in this movie. And I do love that touch of Red Right Hand playing, as then her and Tara kind of sit on the edge of the stage of that theater room. And it ends with Tara claiming, "Thank you for letting me go." And Sam responding, "I knew you could take care of yourself," just kind of hammering home that thematic element, just in case you didn't get it earlier. And then we get, of course, the obligatory Ghostface coming back for one last scare scene. And this time it's Ethan coming back, comes running at them. But I do like this touch, because Kirby, who we thought had been taken out at that point, pops back up. And what does she do? She pushes the TV off of the stand. It lands on Ethan's head, giving us a nice, callback to Stu Macher in Scream 1. And we get a great line from Kirby as, Ethan dies with that TV on his head, as she says, "I saw that in a scary movie once," which I do love that reference right there. And, at this point in the movie, and even upon my rewatch here especially, I'm like, what, maybe I like this movie, more than I remember. But oh man, it's downhill from there in the final, few moments of this movie. I just hate what happens from there, because after that, that would have been a good enough ending. But then we get the unbelievable scene of Chad being wheeled out, and this man is alive, being stabbed at least 12 times by two different ghost faces. He's alive. And if that's not unbelievable enough for you, how about Mindy not only surviving, but she's not even on a stretcher or nothing. She's literally running into the scene like nothing had happened to her. And, talking about, "Oh, I guess the ghost face ride," or whatever the hell she's talking about. Don't really care, because I was so put off by the fact that she was okay, so much so that she was able to be up running around despite being stabbed and taken out, multiple times in the stomach by Ghostface in that subway scene. So, both of those two things, super unbelievable in my opinion. But just to, knock it down a couple more points for me, they have to hit another core 4 line. Oh man, how great. Hit another core 4 line. The corniest part of this movie. Let's hammer it home right here at the end as well. Cannot stand that core 4 shit. And, that getting dropped, plus them surviving, kind of absolutely ruined the end of this movie for me. Yet again, here on my rewatch, as I thought I'd liked it a little bit better up until that point, but that definitely dropped it a little bit in my opinion. But having said that, just as I touched on earlier, I know there's plenty of negative points that I've talked about here through the review, but as far as my rating is concerned for this one, I probably was in the 7 or so range. But then, of course, that ending knocks that down, and I've got to give this one a 6.5 at best for Scream 6, a definite drop-off from Scream 5, in my opinion, and I'm hoping, we come back up off the come down here with Scream 7 coming out, which I'm more excited about, especially since we got Kevin Williamson back. We're getting Nev Campbell back because, like I said earlier, this one just didn't feel right without having Sydney involved. Plus, getting some other returning characters, Scott Foley, David Arquette, Matthew Lillard. I think that's going to make Scream 7 a great one. Like I said, I don't hate Scream 6, but I rank it slightly above average. I'll go with a 6.5 here for Scream 6 in my opinion. But hey, that's just my opinion. I'm sure you have yours as well. I know this movie has a lot of fans also. There's some people that feel the way I do. There's some people that revere this one and prefer it to 5, and that's okay. That's what's so great about this franchise, as I've touched on, throughout these reviews here of the franchise. I don't really necessarily think there's a bad Scream movie. There hasn't been a bad Scream movie yet. There's just some that I prefer more than others, and this one kind of falls into one that I don't prefer as much, but that's okay. I still had a good time with it. Even on my rewatch, the parts that I didn't like, they knocked me a little bit and knocked my score down, but it's still a decent movie. That's my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comment section, as we have done it. We've reviewed all 6 Scream movies, and now it's time to hit up Scream 7. Can't believe I'll be seeing that this week. Can't wait to do so. I'll have an out-of-theater reaction for you guys, spoiler-free, as a YouTube short coming at you after I watch it, and then we'll get into a spoiler review. Thinking maybe Monday. That way people get the weekend to see it. But I also think, I'm considering maybe even doing it as a live stream, so that way you guys can talk about it with me as well. We'll see what happens, but we'll definitely have plenty of Scream 7 content coming at you as we await the release and are super excited about that one, and plenty more Scream stuff to talk about. Just because we've reviewed 1 through 6 now, it's not done. It's just the beginning. But really appreciate you guys checking out these reviews. I appreciate you tuning into this one, and I will catch you on the next one.